What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Behind the Glass Sports Podcast. Thanks for tuning in, whether you're watching via YouTube or you're listening later on in the podcast. You know where you can find us by now: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, and all the like. We thank you for tuning in. We got a special guest with us today. We loved having him on so much the first time with his Nuggets knowledge. We had to get him again. It's Ryan Blackburn of the Denver Stiffs. If you want to follow us all on Twitter, at Brandon_Stoll. For Brandon, at Ryan, or NBA Blackburn, correct?
Yes.
All right. For Ryan Blackburn, if you want to follow him, and at Stephen Priest Jr. for myself. A lot to get to today. Obviously, we can't react to a Nuggets game that should have happened yesterday, which part of me is kind of happy about. My stress levels were an even kill level last night. I didn't go to bed mad. I didn't go to bed too happy. It was just an even kill night. But with that being said, it's more dread because we have to look forward to the game 6 that really is going to decide the Denver Nuggets season. So a lot to unpack there. But Ryan, I mean, first and foremost, I think I speak for all of us when we thought that the Nuggets were the better team going into this series, even though that they were shorthanded 2 guys. It's not like they were head and shoulders above Utah, but I still think fairly, we could say that the Nuggets were the better team. You come out, you win game 1, then you just get boat raced in the games following that. Game 2 was somewhat close in the first half, and then Utah just shoots the lights out of the ball. Game 3 wasn't close, game 4 as well, and then the Nuggets were able to come back in game 5. But when you look at this series, what do you think has gone wrong for the Nuggets? Because when I'm watching this series, I feel like, yes, the Nuggets are a poor defensive team, but there's been times where they play excellent defense. Rotations are there. They're given excellent closeouts, and they're not flying by guys. And Utah is just hitting shots. And then that's not even to get to the pick and roll coverage, the drop coverage that they play, and Donovan Mitchell just has a field day with that. In your mind, what has gone wrong that has the Denver Nuggets down 3-2 in this series?
Well, I think you do have to point to that defense. I think that's definitely the place to start. The stat that I heard was that over the past 25 years, the Nuggets have the worst defense in the playoffs thus far. And when you hear numbers like that, it's hard to go against anything of that nature. The one thing that really brought them back in Game 5 was they were able to figure out how to stop the Jazz. They held them to 44 points in the second half, 23 points in the third quarter, 21 in the fourth quarter. The Jazz also started missing some extra shots. Any of the open shots that they received in that period, they hit at a less prolific clip than they usually do. But Donovan Mitchell has turned into a legitimate superstar, and that has been poor timing for the Nuggets, who the last time they were in the playoffs when a player did that was Stephen Curry back in 2013, where he really turned into a flamethrower at that point. So it's hard to go against anything other than the defense at this point, but I think that's really the place to start.
Yeah, and when I look at this series, and you bring up that 2013 series against the Golden State Warriors, and it's just like, if you're the Nuggets, if you want to become a star, if you want to make your name in the playoffs, just come play the Nuggets. I remember we win game 1, Andre Miller hits that buzzer beater, David Lee gets hurt, and then I knew the series was over, Ryan, when I saw Steph Curry shoot the ball and turn around. I had never seen that before. A player usually watches his shot go in. Steph Curry was so confident that he just ran down the court, and it netted, and I was just like, okay, we just don't have a chance at this point. At certain points, that's how I felt with the Jazz, because, you have guys like Jordan Clarkson, for God's sake. I get the guy can score the ball, but if you're LeBron James and you're watching these games in the bubble, and you're like, where the hell was this in the finals when I needed this? Now, granted, Jordan Clarkson goes off apparently only against the Nuggets. Him and Mike Conley, they have the best averages against the Denver Nuggets. So take that for what it's worth. But it just seems like every team gets going against the Nuggets. It's so frustrating. Now, we mentioned the defense, but there is, and I get every team is dealing with injuries. But you can make an argument that the Denver Nuggets' 2 injuries to their starters, they're probably the most significant injuries missing from any team. Maybe the Lakers, you could make that argument with Avery Bradley, arguably one of their best perimeter defenders, being gone. Rajon Rondo is out as well. But the Nuggets, they're missing their best defender. I'm just going to go. Gary Harris is their best defender. They're missing him. You're missing probably your second best shot creator, maybe third. However you want to stack him up with Will Barton. and Jamal Murray. But those two injuries, how much do you blame this series and where we're at with it on those injuries and having lost those guys?
It's hard to blame it either which way. I would probably say that if those guys were perfectly healthy and you went into this series with them perfectly healthy, then you're probably in a better position because the Nuggets have been starting Paul Millsap and Jeremy Grant together over the past two games, and that was their adjustment after first starting Torrey Craig, Michael Porter Jr., and Paul Millsap all three together. Uh, that lineup didn't go anywhere fast. So I really do think that if you just add more competent pieces, then things they improve dramatically at that point. The Nuggets were playing PJ Dozier for a lot of it. They've been playing Torrey Craig for a lot of this series. They've been playing Michael Porter Jr. for a lot of this series, and while he has certainly had his moments, the Jazz have targeted him on the defensive end, and they wouldn't be targeting guys like Gary Harris and Will Barton. They would have to go to other means in order to score. I really do think that because of Gary Harris and Will Barton being out, the Jazz have had a lot of confidence in being able to get off a consistently good shot attempt no matter when they go down the floor. It hasn't been as much about the offensive end because Jamal Murray has been great, Nikola Jokic has been great, Michael Porter Jr. has had great moments. Those three guys have led Denver's offense to be in a good place no matter what. It's just the defensive end. And Gary Harris and Will Barton being like-sized to a lot of the Utah Jazz guys, like Jordan Clarkson, like Mike Conley, Donovan Mitchell, of course, they would have had a lot more of an answer than what the Nuggets have had so far.
With Malone making the adjustment with starting Grant and Monte in the starting lineup, are you surprised that he didn't take Paul Millsap out?
Yeah, I am, and it's too bad to me because I think we've had 5 games now of really seeing Paul Millsap's deficiencies in terms of defending a team like the Jazz. This has happened for him all season, where a team like the Jazz that spaces the floor out a lot and there's less importance for a backline rim protector, where that team comes into Denver and when Paul Millsap's on the floor, they really blow up. They really explode on the offensive end. The power forward that they use spaces the floor out and really dominates. This has been an ongoing thing throughout the Nuggets season, and I wish that they had more personnel because if I were the Nuggets, I would be starting Murray, Harris, Barton, Grant, and Jokic, and I think the Nuggets win in 6. I really do. As it stands right now, I just don't think that they have the personnel to be able to pull that off, so you have to get a little bit more creative. But Millsap was the guy that when you're starting to make changes in the starting lineup, you look at him, you look at the impact that he's had on the floor and say, okay, it hasn't really been to the standard that he has set for most of his time here in Denver. I definitely think that would have been a good change. I just don't know if the Nuggets are competent or they have enough pieces to be able to make that change. We did see them close with a different lineup that included Michael Porter Jr. and Jeremy Grant on the floor, and I think that's probably a good place to start with where the Nuggets really know how this series is going to go.
And Brandon mentioned Michael Malone, and this series, I mean, there's been points obviously where the players for the Nuggets have been outplayed. Michael Malone, there's been a lot of talk that he's just been flat out outcoached in this series. If you were to grade Malone's performance in this series thus far, how would you grade it? Where have you think he may have fallen short?
I'd give him a C+, and I don't want to say that he has failed in any way because I just did a Jazz podcast and they were raving about some of the adjustments that he had made, especially throughout the game during Game 5. He had continued to make changes to that starting lineup that had helped the Nuggets get into a better situation. Taking Michael Porter and Torrey Craig off the floor, those guys weren't working defensively, so the Nuggets tried something new. But what Michael Malone has done a lot in this series is out of timeouts, he's drawn up some excellent plays. He's helped motivate them to try and do the right things on the defensive end. It's just taken a long time to stick. Once their backs were up against the wall, they really deployed that hard hedge defense that I think the Nuggets fans have come to know and love with Nikola Jokic playing up on the floor a little bit more, being more aggressive, and getting steals out there. That's Malone. That's not necessarily Nikola Jokic. That's not necessarily any of the other members of the defense on the floor. He has to implore those guys to continue to play as hard as possible. And that's what you have to do against a team like the Jazz that's shooting as red hot as they do. So he's helped them stick with it. And despite the fact that they were down 3-1 in the series, they have been motivated to continue to try. They didn't have to. They didn't have to come out in game 5, and they could have just rolled over. It wasn't in their playbook necessarily where they had to try hard. Every other team in the bubble to this point hasn't tried hard once they got down 3 games. So I really do think that there is something to be said there. He's pulled a lot of the right strings. He went to a lineup in game 5 where he trusted PJ Dozier, and PJ Dozier gave him a lot of great minutes. And the average age of that lineup on the floor that closed the game in game 5 was 24 years old. He didn't go to Paul Millsap. He didn't go to Torrey Craig. He didn't go to Monte Morris. He went to the young guys and trusted them to do the right thing. That's good coaching.
Yeah, and I think before Game 5 happened, Steven and I had talked about... I posed a question, when is it time to start thinking about maybe moving on from Malone? Because I guess the question is he the development coach of this team? You know, is he the guy that's going to get them to a certain level, but he can't just take them over the top? And they might have to do something what like Golden State did. And Golden State had different issues with Mark Jackson than just that. But Golden State did lose in the second round twice to the Spurs. And for them, it was time to find someone else that can do something different with the same talent they had, because they knew that they could get there. They just felt like they needed a different head coach to do so. Are the Nuggets in that position, or do you think Malone can be that guy?
I don't know. I think it's a legitimate claim, because after game 3, I think you can absolutely say, yeah, the Nuggets gave up on him. They stopped listening to him in the locker room at that point, and they just didn't care. They decided, no, we're not going to try here. And once you lose the locker room like that, it's really hard to get it back. My thing is that it's very possible that they rejected the game plan in that game and decided to not try. Specifically, I'm talking Nikola Jokic here. And it would have been a really easy thing for the players to just say, yeah, we're done with this. Game 4, game 5, we're just going to get out of this bubble. They could have been gone 3 days ago, and they would have been okay. And they would have gotten on a plane and been sleeping in their own beds. That's not what happened. They came around, and they really did try hard in game 4. I will say that it was probably more of an execution thing than it was an effort thing. They only lost that game by 2 points, mostly due to Jamal Murray, don't get me wrong. But game 5, they were excellent. And they did exactly what they needed to do to impact the Jazz on both sides of the floor. Jamal Murray continues to go off. Been very happy with him, of course. It's hard when you're talking about a team like Golden State. They capped their ceiling with Mark Jackson. They had a lot more talent than they did when they lost in the first round against the Los Angeles Clippers in 2014. And they made a change after that point, because they were clearly capped by the coaching. I don't know if they're capped by the coaching at this point. I think the Nuggets young players just have to defend. And if they can't learn how to defend, then I don't know how much of that is on Malone versus on the players that they got. Now, maybe you can say they need to get a new coach in here who can teach the young guys how to defend, but I think Jamal Murray's turned into a pretty good defender. I think Nikola Jokic, when he's engaged and when he's not put in a very specific situation, has turned into a very good defender. The real question is whether they can put it all together, whether they can fight through the deficiencies that they have and continue to put things together and fight through all of the strife that comes through when you're hitting in the playoffs. So
Right.
I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, and I really do think that Malone, he's gotten a lot of flack, a lot more than he deserves. But there is Game 3 still. That will never leave my mind.
Right. And there's a couple things that I think we have to consider with this. And you just mentioned it before Brandon asked you this question. I mean, the lineup that finished that last game, the average age you said was 24. We have to keep in mind that with this team, and it's hard to do because Jamal's in his fifth year, Nicola's in his fifth, fourth, sixth year, something like that. But again, Nicola's 25, Jamal is 23, and if you want to throw MPJ in there, he's 21. So we have to remember that this group is not only young in age, even though they've got some years NBA experience-wise, except for MPJ, obviously. But for Nicola and Jamal, your two best players, this is only their second time in the playoffs. So there's still a lot of growing pains that we have to go through with this group. As far as when it comes to Malone, I think I'm on the side of, you know what? This is a weird year. It's a weird circumstance. I understand what happened in those two middle games. They get just completely blown off the floor. It looks like this team has given up on them. I don't think they've given up on them, but I think it points to more so the Nuggets' immaturity at times. There's times where, I think they get punched in the mouth early and they don't want to hit back. And a lot of that is on Nicola. I think there's times where he just wants to be just passive. He just comes out and he just wants to pass the ball. And it's not a bad thing because that's his best asset. That's what makes him him. He'd rather see others flourish than himself flourish. And I think for him, it's a situation where he needs to learn in games or going into games. Tonight, I need to be aggressive. Tonight, I need to put up 30. And then maybe afterwards, I get 7 assists instead of, you know what, tonight I want to go for 15 and 20 assists. It's a line that he has to kind of learn and tiptoe around as well as a player. But when you look at this team, and I get with Malone and everything like that, and possibly having him on the hot seat, I just don't think it's the right thing to do to immediately put him on the hot seat after a shortened season, a weird postseason. Now, I do think next year is a year where that seat maybe could get a little bit warm, because if they get to second round berth last year, you lose in 7. This year you lose in the first round if they do 6 or 7. But even if they get past, maybe they lose the next round. Then now you're looking at, all right, 2 straight second round exits. What more can we do with this team? I'm just not ready to go there yet with Malone. I still believe in him, but I think it speaks to the maturity of this team at times. And a question that we've heard a lot around local people, media members, is this team soft? Would you throw that label on the Nuggets as soft, or would you just kind of notch it up to they're just not mentally tough there all the time, I guess?
No. Would you describe Jamal Murray as soft?
I would not, no.
I don't think there's any way anybody could possibly describe Jamal Murray as soft.
But is he the only one?
No, he's not the only one. I think you don't necessarily point to Nikola Jokic as a hard-nosed veteran who does things the right way all the time, and he's not a Gruden grinder for all of you NFL people. Like that's not what Nikola Jokic is going to do. He plays a very team basketball oriented game and a European style game where everybody has to be on the same page. Everybody is connected. The Jazz play that same way too, by the way. The Utah Jazz, with Joe Ingles especially running pick and roll and Rudy Gobert on the roll, they play exactly that same style. You have to move the ball, you do the right thing, you don't necessarily be physical with anybody. You're just you're making the exact correct movements in order to generate the best shot possible. Jokic loves to play that way. He doesn't love to play bully ball. He's asked to play bully ball a lot, and I thought we saw in Game 5 he played enough of it that it worked. Like he hit enough shots from outside that he got off to a good start, and then he gave the reins to Jamal in that Game 5 because Jamal was the guy. Like he's proven that he's the guy in a lot of those situations where he can carry this team now. That's really cool. I think there are definitely some questions about this team being soft from the outside. knowing them a little bit better and knowing who Jamal is, knowing Jeremy Grant and Torrey Craig and a lot of those guys, like Monte Morris is not soft either. Sometimes they're just not good enough at times. Sometimes the execution isn't good enough at times. I would never consider the Nuggets soft, though. I think that is a term given to their superstar because he is a white European center. And I think if you ask anybody around the league, like really ask them, Jokic is not soft. He does what he needs to do. He's a bully at times. He likes to play the game the right way. He'll choose to play the game the right way, but it's not because he can't do the other thing. He can, and he has at times. We saw in the playoffs last year that he is a bully at times. It hasn't always manifested that way against the two-time reigning defensive player of the year. So that's okay. Like I give him a little bit of a pass for it.
Let's get to Jamal because Malone made the lineup change of putting Monte next to him. And a lot of people have said Jamal isn't a point guard. And I've always said I think he is and I think he can be. He's just the modern, combo guard, point guard, right? But with Monte at the point, or at least sharing a lot of that load with Jamal and Jokic at this point, I actually like Jamal at the 2, where he can just focus on scoring, be that guy, and don't worry about running an offense. Just put up 40, 50 points if he needs to, and just focus on that. Let Monte and Jokic take care of the rest. So I've completely flipped on where they should put Jamal from here on out. I think Jamal should be a 2 from here on out. Do you agree, or is it more of eventually he will just be back at the point and he'll kind of figure that out a little bit better, I guess?
He's had times where even when the point guards are off the floor, PJ Dozier, Monte Morris, there have been times where he has excelled as the only ball handler on the floor. I will say that. What I do say is that given the way that positionless basketball works now, there are a lot of different ways that you can organize a lineup and organize the roles on the floor so that everybody is at their peak potential. With Jamal, he doesn't always have to take the ball up the floor. It can be PJ Dozier, it can be Monte Morris, it can be Nikola Jokic. Nikola Jokic takes the ball up the floor a lot of these possessions. Like he's really starting as the point guard. And we've always seen that. We've always seen Jokic as the de facto point guard of the offense, the playmaker of the offense, while Jamal Murray is riffing off of him, trying to score in different ways. He receives the ball, and maybe he's playmaking for somebody else at that point. But given Denver's unique offense, I don't like the label of point guard, shooting guard, center. I really do think that Michael Porter Jr. is your off-ball scorer. Nikola Jokic is your primary playmaker and bruiser inside when he gets down there. Murray's your primary scoring option, and that to me, it doesn't necessarily entail less assist responsibility, but he's averaging more assists than Jokic this year, or in these playoffs. I really it's kind of nuts to say that he's averaging 6.8 assists and Jokic is averaging 5. So those roles have kind of flipped for me, where despite the fact that Murray has shared the floor with another point guard, those guys aren't having the ball as often. They really aren't. Like, the ball is in Murray's hands. It's just having another playmaking option that's capable of handling the ball when it comes to them. But the Nuggets are basically playing 2 point guards. That's what we're getting at here. It's nice that their shooting guard option, if you want to call him that, in Jamal, is also a ball handler. But I really do think that it's a positionless basketball where you have multiple options, where everybody can handle the ball on the floor. Jeremy Grant can handle the ball. Michael Porter Jr., not really a handler, but he could hold the ball and shoot it. Like, that's really his role in that case. But there are a lot of opportunities when the Nuggets have their best offensive lineup out there for everybody to handle. Murray is technically painted as the 2, but I still consider him a point guard. I'll say he's a playmaking guard. He's one of many.
Okay, I'll say that I'll ask you this then: Is he? We've talked about a big issue with Jamal has been consistency, and I think some of that has been the responsibility of having to play that point guard role because there is no other ball handler out there other than Jokic. So having Monte or PJ Dozier out there with him for most of the game, does that at least take some responsibility off of him to where he can be more consistent as a scorer? Because since the move was made, he's averaging, 45.5 points, or no, 40 something points per game. So is that, does that help, I guess, his consistency to where he can score, maybe not 45 a game, but, 28, 30 a game instead of having these 14, 10, explosion game back to 10? Does that help that?
I'm not sure it's a position thing. I really do think it's a mentality thing because he's also averaging 7.5 assists and 0 turnovers in those games too.
Right.
So it hasn't been a one-dimensional scoring performance from him. With a shooting guard, sometimes they'll receive the ball and then they'll shoot, and that's not necessarily what he's doing. He's being a playmaker in addition to that. I would point to it as lessening the playmaking load on him just a little bit and saying, hey, you don't have to take the ball up the floor every single time. That's what he has to do in the regular season most of the time. But I'd also point to the fact that Gary Harris and Will Barton being out. We've talked about Will Barton being their secondary playmaker, the guy who, when he gets the ball in his hands, he can also create off the dribble. Not having him out there in these playoffs, I think, has put more pressure on Jamal, not less. That even if you had Monte Morris out there, even if you have PJ Dozier out there, they're not Will Barton. Those guys are not as good and not as capable. So Jamal has also seen that. He has had to take on more responsibility for lesser guys being on the floor, lesser capable playmakers and scorers. So he's had more responsibility, and I think he's responded to that in a healthy way because it hasn't just been scoring. He's also passing. He's also creating. The dagger play that the Nuggets drew up when he was isolating at the top of the key, he threw it to Nikola Jokic in the corner, and Jokic hits the shot. So I think he has grown a lot as a player, and it hasn't just been as a scorer. It hasn't just been with the consistency factor, although that has really helped. I think that him not having other options on the floor and it really just being him and Nikola and sometimes Michael Porter Jr., that has helped him refocus himself and say, it has to be you. If it's not you, who else is it?
Right. And we talked about this, Brandon and I, on the last podcast we did. Jamal, if you look at his game log for this series, I mean, it's game 1, 36 and 9. And just looking specifically at the points, 36 points. Then he follows it up with 14, 12. Then he goes nuts, 50 and 42. This has kind of been, if you were to, describe Jamal to somebody that doesn't watch basketball and they asked about Jamal Murray, what is he like as a player? Just show them this game log right here. This is Jamal's synopsis as a player. He has all the potential in the world to completely go berserk on you and take over games and close games. But then there's stretches where he goes 14 points, 6 of 13, 12 points, 5 of 16. Thankfully, it's not long, but it's stretches like this where he puts together 2 or 3 really nice games, and then there's 2 or 3 really, below average, below his standards games. When you look at Jamal, is he there yet? Do you think he's there? Because I'm always hesitant with Jamal. It always feels like fool's gold. I'm like, man, he looked really good. I'm ready to say the second star is there. He's arrived. But then he gives me 14 and 12, and then I go back to, see, this is why I can't trust him. Do you think he's arrived?
Let's go back to game 2 real quick. The Nuggets put up a really high offensive rating in that game. Their offensive performance was very good. It wasn't like Jamal, like his individual scoring numbers weren't great, but the team's numbers were very good in that game. The Jazz's were just unbelievably high. Yeah. And Denver couldn't keep up with it. They couldn't get to the fourth quarter where Jamal would be on the floor for most of that time, where he would be taking over. So I tend to give him the benefit of the doubt in that game. Game 3, they got shellacked. There's no other way to say it. Murray came out. He wasn't good in that game. That one, I will say, hey, look, it's on one hand, he was looking for his shot and couldn't respond. On the other, the rest of the team couldn't respond either. So it's hard to blame it on just him.
For sure.
when everything in their mother seemed to be going wrong at that point. So I look at the games where it was competitive in the fourth quarter and overtime, in game 1, game 4, and game 5, and see him showing up in those games, him being extremely good in the fourth quarter and overtime in a lot of those cases, him putting up he put up 20 points in the fourth quarter and overtime of the first game, him putting up 50 total in game 4, and putting up 42 in game 5, and really carrying them on his back down the stretch. I really do think he's arrived. I think that we have seen a switch flip with him, and whenever the Nuggets can keep it close in the fourth quarter, he can take over at that point. He has shown that he can take over at that point, even against a team that's a really good defense with Royce O'Neal, Rudy Gobert. He has taken advantage of what they've thrown at him and said, hey, whenever you throw Rudy Gobert at me, I'm going to space him out, force him to defend Nikola Jokic in space, and then going to either throw it back to Jokic for a three, or he's going to generate enough space for his own shot. When they're not giving Rudy Gobert at the floor, he's going to go at him right at the rim. They've done multiple times where he's isolated against his own man, or he's had a screen from a power forward and say, hey, look, we're going to get Jamal in space, and we're going to have him go directly at Rudy Gobert. And he hasn't done poorly. He's done a really, really good job consistently throughout this series. Whenever the Nuggets have kept it close, Jamal has been excellent. When they haven't kept it close in the fourth quarter, he hasn't been able to show what he could do. So I tend to put it more on that and less on the fact that he's inconsistent, though I do understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, and I guess my follow-up to that would be, and it's not like I'm expecting Jamal to go out there and average 35. That's a lot.
He's averaging 30.
Right. But like, no one's saying, hey, you need to score 50, you need to score 42. But for him going forward, and I think for this Nuggets team to eventually get to where at least they want to be, or at least close, he's got to be a 25 to 28 point per game scorer. I think that's ideal. That's where you want him at. Jokic, if we could get him up from the low 20s, because we know what he can do. If he can get around the 25 to 28 for his career. With Jamal and him doing this, you see him putting this reel together and this on his resume. Is there now a real argument to be made going into next year that maybe it's Jamal as the best player, that he should be the one that this team builds around? Or is it still, this is Nikola's team, he's the guy?
I don't know if you have to make that choice. I think given the fact that they work as well as they do together, that I don't know if you have to make that choice at all. I think you can say, hey, we have 2 All-Stars. We don't just have one now. We have 2. Those guys are both excellent, and we don't want to choose between the 2. We're going to build around our 2 All-Stars. You hope that Michael Porter Jr. can join them in that discussion. Nikola Jokic has proven that he's at his ceiling is a top 5 player. He hasn't been at his ceiling in these playoffs, and that has been a problem. Jamal Murray has. He's scraped the ceiling on what he can do, and I hope he can continue to keep it up. I think you have to see whether he can do it in the regular season next year, and just before you make sure, hey, look, we want to give you the keys, we trust you, but we also want to make sure that you're shooting 40% from 3, and you're approaching 50, 40, 90 like we think you can, and you're instead of scoring 18 a game like you've done the last 2 regular seasons, that you're up in the 22, 24 range, and your assists are going up. I think he could do all of those things. I still think he has to prove it in the regular season, and I hope that he gets the opportunity to, because I do think that this team is at their best when he is going hard and when Nikola Jokic is riffing off of him as well. But the point is that they go off of each other. It really is a symbiotic relationship. It's not a one-sided thing. Jokic and Murray, they run their dance, and their dance generates points.
Yeah. Real quick, Brandon, before you go, it's funny that you mentioned this too, because I put this tweet out about Jokic. I was like, does anybody else feel like Jokic is kind of just underwhelmed this playoff? So I looked at his game log. Now his plus minus, his average for plus minus is probably horrendous. He's been in negative more so than the plus this series. But I mean, game 1, 29 and 10. Game 2, 28, 11 and 6. Game 3 was a stinker when they get blown out. 15, 6 and 5, whatever. 29, 6 and 7. Game 4, 31, 6 and 4. Like, if that's Jokic, like, man, he's kind of just been this series. Like, I'll take that 100%. And that just shows you, and that's why it's so frustrating for Nuggets fans and people around here that watch this team religiously. it's so frustrating when you see Jokic not being aggressive, because if this is him just not putting his foot down on the gas pedal and that's what he's doing, man, if he just had the mindset of I can dominate every night, at that point, what is his numbers? But it's crazy. I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Let's get to Game 6.
No, I do think that.
Oh no, go ahead. Go ahead, Ryan.
No, I do think that like it has gone under the radar given how awesome that Jamal Murray has been. That Nikola Jokic really has brought it for most of the times offensively. It hasn't been perfect. He hasn't had the back cuts to other guys, and he hasn't done the normal highlight passes in the playoffs that he's grown accustomed to. But that's also come with the fact that the Nuggets don't have all of their personnel. They haven't been able to do everything that they want to do. And the Jazz have just put together a really good defensive team that they've been geared to stop him first. He is line 1 on the scouting report, and Jamal Murray is line 2. Let's be honest here. That's the reason why we're seeing what we're seeing. Jamal Murray has totally bashed them offensively, and the Nuggets have been able to make it work. Jokic has also been able to make it work. He has done a really good job against the 2-time reigning Defensive Player of the Year. So we have to continue to float that and say, hey, look, what happens when Jokic is being defended by Enes Kanter? Or if he's being defended next series by, if the Nuggets were to get that far, by Kristaps Porzingis or Ivica Zubac. Like, if you're one of the other two teams, Rudy Gobert's much better on defense than either of those two guys. Like, let's be real. Like, those guys are, like, Rudy Gobert is great, and those guys are merely good. What happens when Jokic has that much more room?
All right, let's get to Game 6, because kind of something that you said is Utah has focused their defense mostly on stopping Jokic first. And if Jamal beats him, Jamal beats him at this point. That's kind of what the, I guess, MO is on Denver. But if they come out and Utah makes an adjustment where they say Jamal's not going to beat them, and they focus on Jamal, whether it's blitzing him, doubling him off screens, whatever it is, they give Jamal different looks, and they stick Gobert on Jokic, and they try and limit Jokic as much as possible. They only had 4 guys in double figures in Game 5. Grant had 13, and Porter had 15. No one else even reached 8. I think the next highest was 5 from Torrey Craig. So if Jamal can't go out there and put up 40-50 in Game 6, and Jokic, let's say he puts up his 25-30, who else steps up? Who else needs to step up? What needs to happen? Because they can't win like that again.
I think we're all waiting for the Michael Porter Jr. game. He did have 28 points in Game 2 in what was still a blowout because the Nuggets weren't able to defend. But if the Nuggets are able to keep things close with the Jazz, and like you said, Jamal, he isn't going off to the same degree that he has been. Nikola Jokic isn't going off to the same degree that he has been. I do think that Porter has that capability if they choose to go to him, and I think they will. I think that they understand that, look, the 4 scorers that they can truly rely on every single night are Murray, Porter, Jokic, and Grant. Not in that order, but those 4 are going to be on the floor. Those are the guys that they trust more often than not in these situations. I think they're going to get a lot of opportunities, and we've seen Porter. He has only had 1 game this series where he shot under 40% from 3 in a game. He has been lethal from the perimeter for most of this series, and I trust him that if he gets an opportunity, he'll knock those shots down. He's definitely not going to be hesitant. That guy, if there's one thing about him as a shooter and as a scorer, he's not a hesitant player. So if he's given an opportunity, if they decide, hey, we're going to go to you, we're going to drop some plays for you, the Nuggets have to be willing to do that, and they have to trust him. But I think he can do that. I think he can put up 20. I think that's a number that you can start looking at and say, hey, if Murray's only putting up 30 as opposed to 42, and if Jokic is putting up 25 as opposed to 31, whatever he is, I think that you can look at Porter and say, hey, look, we're going to need you to go get 20, 25, and he's capable of doing that. It doesn't have to come from other players. You want the players that are also on the floor with Jokic and Murray to be able to do those things. Porter is Denver's Rodney Hood this season. or this series. He's capable of doing that. He's capable of putting up a crooked number, and he's capable of winning them a playoff game. I promise you that.
I'm looking at the box score, and I didn't notice this until now. And outside of those four, I mean, I guess my question is, outside of those four, can they win with just those four? Because here's the thing: those four are the only guys to play more than 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Grant had 40, Jokic 43, Murray 41, Porter 34. The next highest was Dozier with 20 minutes. That's insane. So I guess, can those four playing the same minutes and everyone else playing 20 or less, can they win game 6?
Yeah, I do think so. That you have to come up with other options surrounding those four players in order to do it. But I've looked this up. The Nuggets' best four-man group in terms of raw plus minus is those four: Murray, Porter, Grant, Jokic. When those four are on the floor, the Nuggets have been good this series. They've made things work. It's when those four are off the floor, or only in some combination featuring Millsap or Craig or Morris or some other combination, that the Nuggets have struggled. I think you're going to see high volume minutes from those guys, and all four of them are capable of scoring. All four are capable of shooting. You don't need a lot from other guys. I think if you're looking for one player to really step up outside of those four, it's Monte Morris. He's a guy who his three-point shot hasn't clicked over the last few games. Ever since game 2, he hasn't hit an outside shot. If he can start hitting shots, if he could be a playmaker out there next to those guys, then that would be great. If you're PJ Dozier, he was 1 of 1 in game 5. The Jazz are going to force him to shoot a little bit more in game 6 when he's out there. Is he capable of hitting those shots? Is he capable of getting to the rim and finishing through contact? That's a big question that I have. I don't know if he's there. I don't know if he's capable. I don't know if the Nuggets trust him. But he's another guy that I point to. I think if you're looking to steal minutes in the first 3 quarters of the game, I think Paul Millsap has to get going a little bit better than he has. He's shown that he's capable of doing it in game 4, but that's the only time that I've really seen him, other than the regular season, that he can really step up. So if they can get some outside shots from each of those guys, Torrey Craig, Paul Millsap, Monte Morris, they can do it with mainly the 4 guys that I mentioned as the scoring threats. I promise.
Do you think they force a game 7?
Yes.
Okay. For me, I just think it's a situation where I'm leaning more Utah, because when I look at this series in a nutshell, and we've kind of brushed on it, each game that Denver has won, it's gone down to the wire, and they've needed heroic almost performances from Jamal and Jokic to an extent, but more so Jamal, to kind of, I don't want to say bail them out, but really carry them through stretches of games. Whereas for Utah, granted, they've been shooting lights out, and it seems like every game they just don't miss. It feels like when they win, their offense is flowing. Donovan Mitchell's in, a mode, and he's able to feed off that, or his teammates are able to feed off that. And there's just so much aggression, especially when guys get the ball. I mean, they're attacking the basket, shots are open, rotations are just sloppy for Denver. It's just all over the place. I'm leaning more towards Utah. Hopefully you're right. I want to get your take on this, though. The drop coverage that the Nuggets have been playing. And for those who don't know what that is, essentially when Donovan's coming off that pick from Gobert, Jokic is not meeting him up high. He's staying back there. He's kind of really more so playing the role rather than the guy that's coming off. And that's giving Donovan so much room to operate. He can, if he wanted to take that elbow jumper every time, he could. That's how much space it seems like he's getting every time. He's got a floater. He likes to kind of weave in front of Gobert every time and then make his decision from there. He can hit a corner guy if that weak side dips down too much. Do you like the Nuggets playing the pick and roll that way, or would you like them to try something else?
Well, I thought we saw in the second half of Game 5 where Jokic was starting to hard hedge a little bit more, where he was starting to get up at the level, really pressure Donovan Mitchell as much as possible, force him to make a tough pass, force him to pick up his dribble. And I thought we saw that work. I think you can get away with drop coverage. I really do. The problem that you run into is that if you're if you're the guy who's defending the main ball handler, most of the time it's Jeremy Grant now, that you have to get through the screen. If
Yes.
you can't get through the screen, then it's not going to be able to work. We saw a much improved defensive performance this past game from Jeremy Grant as a guy who could get around the Rudy Gobert screen and stay attached to Donovan Mitchell if he can. If you stay attached, Jeremy Grant's 6'9", Donovan Mitchell's 6'1". Like there's a major height difference there and a major length difference there, where Jeremy Grant has the capability to contest from the rear view, from the side. And if you can get to that point, if you can bother him just a little bit, if you can throw him off just a touch, you put the ball more in Mike Conley's hands, you put the ball more in Joe Ingles' hands. And once you get to that point, if you can get it out of Donovan Mitchell's hands just a little bit more, then I think you're capable. I think if you're the Nuggets, you feel pretty good about your chances at that point. Look, if Donovan Mitchell's going to shoot 75% on mid-range jumpers and floaters, then the Nuggets are going to say, hey, more power to you. We'll see you guys next year. It's a really tough situation. You can't take away everything. If you take away the rim and the 3-point line and they're shooting 75% of the mid-range, then what can you do as a defense? That's the
Right.
point about the coverages this year and in the modern day, is that you can't take everything away, especially with Jokic on the floor. Then there's only so much you can do as a defense. If you have to give up the mid-range and you're still contesting it pretty well and they're just making it, there's nothing you can do.
Right. You just got to hope they miss. And Utah just hasn't been doing that at that point. And
They started missing more in game 5.
Right.
And if you can get that switch to flip a little bit, if you get them to second guess themselves a little bit. Royce O'Neal second guessed himself at the end of that fourth quarter. He had that record scratch moment where he caught the ball with 3 minutes to go, had an opportunity to shoot the ball and tie the game, and he just hesitated. He traveled. Like there's no way other than he was kind of a little bit rattled at that point. If the Nuggets can put that kind of pressure on the opposing team, force them to second guess themselves, they're going to force a game 7. I promise.
Right. Well, I'm so glad you brought up the pick and roll and specifically, the guys who are getting screened. If they just show some fight, because they're just dying on those screens. And I get it. Gobert's not an easy guy to get through or get around. But I mean, man, Grant, Craig, Monte, even if it's Jamal, but it's mainly those three guys or Dozier. It just seems like they're just dying on that screen. I almost just want them to, you know what? If you can't get over it, go under it and just try and contest Donovan. I mean, if he makes it over you every time, you just have to live with that. But I mean, if you go under and if you're trying to go over, you're already behind him. And then Gobert, now it's a 2-on-1 situation essentially, and you're asking Jokic to be put in a tough situation. Now he's forced to choose essentially. But that to me, I just think has been a huge thing, and really effort. So much about defense is really just effort. If you just give the effort to try and play hard, I mean, you're gonna force some missed shots. You're gonna force some tough contests. That's why I hate the flyby. I think it's a lazy cop out on defense. So much of the NBA, if these guys just close out and give a nice choppy closeout and put their hand up, I mean, you're not blocking shots on the perimeter very often. Just put your hand up. If the guy hits the shot, he hits the shot. But I mean, if you fly by, you're giving guy either the option to A, reset and take the shot, an open shot. You're allowing him to drive to the basket, and then your defense has to converge on him. Now he can dish. It's just, man, it's so frustrating watching the Nuggets defense sometimes, because they epitomize everything I hate about lazy defense. It's just stupid. Go ahead.
One thing that I've been thinking about the last couple days has been, with the postponements of the games, how big of an impact is that for the Nuggets? How much does that help them? Because now the thought of Gary Harris returning for Game 6 instead of, possibly waiting till the second round if you get there, that's now a possibility, it sounds like. If he does play, how much does he play, and does he give them enough to where they can win the series?
It's a tough question. I don't know what the rotation would look like in that case if he was back. I can't imagine that he plays more than 15 minutes because there's only so much that you can do at a playoff intensity having not played for 5.5 months. Like it's just a really tough situation to walk back into. but he may have to. He may be in a situation where the Nuggets just desperately need that. So I hope he can come back. I think he can provide a positive boost if he does. I think he provides another option to defend Mike Conley, Jordan Clarkson, Joe Ingles sometimes. I'm not sure you want to put him on Donovan Mitchell, but maybe you do. Maybe you say, hey, look, here's another guy that you haven't faced in a while, and you know how good he is. You may test him a little bit, but if he gets into your airspace, then you might be in a tough situation. So I think that as long as he's out there, as long as they could get 10 to 15 of good, solid defensive minutes out of him, if he can hit one outside shot, then I think the Nuggets are going to be crystal. They're gonna be really happy with having that production out there.
Yeah, I think if they win Game 6, I think they win the series. I think they at that point have all of the momentum in the world. But it's just, I guess my thing is, I don't believe that they can win with just 4 guys playing well. Someone needs to step up, and I don't know who's gonna step up out of this group. I have zero belief in Paul Millsap. Like you said, Monte hasn't hit a 3 since Game 2. Outside of those 4 main guys, one other player hit a 3, and that was Torrey Craig. He was 1 for 3. So unless someone steps up, and I don't know who steps up, I don't know if they win Game 6. Is it a possibility that we see maybe a Bol play 5 minutes instead of Plumlee, a Troy Daniels play 5 minutes instead of a Plumlee, someone who can just come in and hit an outside shot? Because PJ isn't shooting. He's not really forced to shoot, so he's playing well. He was a plus 21, so I'm not going to put that on him. But Torrey was 1 for 3 from 3. At least he hit a 3. Monte's 0 for 2. I mean, Paul Millsap was 0 for 1 from 3, 1 for 4 from the field. So I don't know where. That's my concern is the bench guys. Even though Porter's coming off the bench, the other guys outside of those 4, I don't believe in any of them really. So is it time to maybe give Bol 5 minutes or even Troy Daniels 5 minutes?
I would say no, and the reason why I would say no is if you look at the Utah bench, you're in the same boat. It's just Jordan Clarkson, and the other guys that you're relying upon at that point are Jawan Morgan, and who did give them good minutes in the first 2 games. Don't get me wrong, but Tony Bradley, who when Rudy Gobert comes off the floor, but they don't have a great bench either. You're in a situation where the 4 guys in Denver or in Utah's starting lineup that give you pause are Mitchell, Conley, Ingles, and Gobert. I think you trust Royce O'Neal to not make a ton of shots, and if he does make shots, then it is what it is. He's their Torrey Craig. He's better than Torrey Craig, but he's their Torrey Craig. So if your Craig gives you good shots, and if he can provide just 1 or 2 threes at the outset, then you're in a good position for the end game. Because I think all you have to do is get to the 4th quarter. If you can get to the 4th quarter and the game's close, the ball's going to be in Jokic and Murray's hands for the entirety of it. All you need is to have those 2 guys, Grant and Porter, on the floor to space the floor at 6'9" and taller, and then you really don't have to do that much else with that 5th guy. They're going to be in the corner for most of the time. They're going to back up for most of the time, maybe grab some offensive rebounds, but if they have to hit an outside shot, then I think you're probably hoping that it's Monte Morris out there, I would guess. Maybe Gary Harris is that guy if he's back. I don't know. I wouldn't trust Bol. I don't think they can play defense with him on the floor. I don't think they can play defense with Troy Daniels on the floor. I think you have to trust that the 4 guys on the floor that you trust mostly with the offense can get it done, and then the rest of the guys are focused on defense. I think that's a more common thing for playoff teams than you realize, is that, hey, you got your 3 to 4 guys that you're really relying upon to score, and everybody else is a role player. Everybody else, when they get an open shot, they have to take it. But most of the time, they're not getting open shots anyway. So you just have to do what you got to do.
So if it's Jamal versus Mitchell with 5 minutes to go, essentially, and it comes down to that, just like it did with games 1, I guess 4 and 5. I guess Jamal is 2-1 in those games. Are you taking
and the
Jamal?
double OT game in the
And the
bubble.
double OT game in the seeding games. So I guess he's 3-1 against Mitchell when it comes down to it. I mean, are you taking Jamal at that point?
Yeah. I think that Mitchell has done a better job than Jamal overall in this series in the first 3 quarters. But when you get down to the 4th quarter and you get down to the crunch time where the opposing team really starts to lock in on you, they can't lock in on Jamal as hard as Denver locks in on Utah and Mitchell, because Jamal also has Nikola Jokic out there on the floor. He's also averaging 26 a night. He's shooting 47% from 3, I thought the number was. So they have other options to really punish the Jazz. That if they lock in too hard on Murray, Murray's a willing passer, and he's been a capable passer too this series. I think that needs to go set. I think that I trust Murray. I don't think he's given us any reason to not trust him at this point. And I think that once this game gets down to the 4th quarter, 5 minutes remaining, if you want to go blow for blow, we've seen Murray do that. I do trust him to be able to keep that up.
Lastly, before we close things for today, and Ryan Blackburn joining us of the Denver Stiffs, site manager for the Denver Stiffs, go check out their content if you haven't already. I saw that you were tagged in a trade by Mason Ginsberg, who writes for the New Orleans. He writes for a New Orleans Pelicans blog site. I don't remember the website name. And the trade consisted of, if I remember right, it was Gary, it was Bol, and I think a Nuggets first round pick for Lonzo, Darius Miles, I think it was, or something. I believe it's
Darius Miller. He's
Miller.
a salary cap piece that you
Right.
just have to do in order to get the money to work.
And then a second round pick. What is your, because you liked the trade, right? You would do that trade. What is your reasoning behind that?
That's probably the threshold that I would accept. I think Mason really pushed it very hard on me in order to get it done. I would probably not include the picks at all. Is where I'm at with it, because Bol represents a first round talent. Like he's very, very good. The problem that you run into with Bol on the Nuggets is that Michael Porter Jr. is 6'10". He's not a true small forward. He's really a power forward in terms of his movement on the floor. Jeremy Grant is the guy who defends small forwards. Nikola Jokic is your center. He's your guy. You want to lock him in for the foreseeable future. Where does Bol fit into that? Can they put together a championship contender that includes him playing a ton of minutes? I don't know if they can. He could be extremely talented. He could be very, very good, and I totally trust that. But I look at a guy like Lonzo Ball, and I see somebody who shot 37% from 3 on high volume this year, plays a lot like PJ Dozier on the defensive end, where he's very smart, intelligent, long, can defend the opposing team's best guard player. I see a guy that at his ceiling could work really well with a Murray and a Porter and a Jokic and do the things that you need to do around those guys to win a championship. And with Gary Harris, he's been injured for a lot of it. With Bol, I don't know if he can contribute to that. We're getting to a point where if you're looking for players who can contribute to championship winning, I think Lonzo Ball is the type of talent that you're going for that can fit next to your big 3 and say, hey, this is the guy that helps us get over the top as a role player, that if he's shooting the ball well, could be a major piece.
And he'd be an interesting fit to this team, right? Because it's another guy who can handle the ball, who can make really well for his teammates. You mentioned that he's an improved 3-point shooter, but then that really, I mean, we talked about earlier Jamal being able to move a little bit more off ball with Monte handling it. I mean, if you added a guy like Lonzo to this lineup, maybe he's not the defender that Gary Harris is, but you don't lose a lot there. But you also get more offensively than what Gary's providing you, and you allow Jamal to kind of free roam a little bit more. It'd be an intriguing fit for sure. For me, and this kind of goes to the soft label that sometimes gets thrown around with the Nuggets. I do think they don't have an edge. They don't have guys on the floor that really seem to provide that attitude that even if you punch us, we're going to punch you back. There's 2 free agents that are coming up this summer, and they're not big name. Well, they're names, but they're not big name superstar type of guys. It's Jay Crowder and it's Montrezl Harrell. Now, you might have to overpay for guys like that. But when I look at those 2 guys, and I don't know if there's a situation where the Nuggets could get both, but at least one, I think those are type of guys that can not only provide you attitude, I think Montrez could provide you what Mason provides you, but is better offensively. Even though he's shorter than Mason is. And I look at a guy like Jay Crowder, who's your typical 3-and-D guy, can D you up, and man, I mean, he's played really well for Miami right now. When you hear those names, what do you think of those as potential additions for the Nuggets? Do you think that's something they'd kick the tires on for those guys? How do you think they'd fit for a team like this?
The first thing I think of with Montrezl Harrell is that he's going to be too pricey.
Yeah.
I think he may have priced himself out of what the Nuggets can offer, given that they've tied up a bunch of money to Jokic and Murray, and they still have Gary Harris and Will Barton under contract. The next guy that they pay, I think you prefer Jeremy Grant to a guy like Montrezl Harrell, and I don't think you want to, I don't think you have enough money for both of them.
Right.
I think what Grant provides you as an on-ball defender, as a floor spacer, as somebody who he has been really good in this series. It hasn't been perfect, but he's been really good. Montrezl Harrell's a guy kind of like Paul Millsap, who in his prime, Paul Millsap would give you buckets underneath the rim. He'd be that intense guy. He'd be that defensive force. He'd rebound hard. He'd fight. And Montrezl Harrell, I don't think he can be on the floor with the Nuggets in their closing five in a championship series. I think that you're looking at Jokic, you're looking at Porter, you're looking at Murray, and then you're trying to space the floor around those guys if you can, and play defense, perimeter defense around those guys if you can. I don't think Montrezl provides that. I do think Jay Crowder provides that. I think he's a good option. I think his three-point percentage in Miami has been really good. It's not what I would consider sustainable given the rest of his career. But if he's another option that you can add in addition to Jeremy Grant, that's a good rotation to have, where you have Porter and Grant as your starters. You have Jay Crowder coming off the bench and providing a lot of intensity. And maybe if Jeremy Grant doesn't have it that game, then you finish the game with Jay Crowder. Or if you want to go super defensive, you go Jay Crowder and Jeremy Grant. So I think he's a good option. That's a good name to think about if you're a Nuggets fan, and he could be within their price range for sure.
Yeah, when I look at next season, obviously they're going to open up a lot of money with Paul Millsap leaving. I don't think Paul Millsap comes back at this point. One thing that I've kind of noticed with this team that they don't have this year that they've had the last couple of years that I thought helped them a lot was they didn't play, but they helped mentally. Richard Jefferson or Isaiah Thomas. A veteran guy that can kind of... It's been around, Jefferson won a championship. Isaiah didn't, but he got far into the playoffs. He's more of a leader type of guy in the locker room. Is there a scenario where they add someone like that? Or, is it up to these young guys to just say, hey, you got to do it without them? I guess they're in that situation now, but could a veteran like that kind of help? A guy like maybe a Kyle Korver, although Korver would probably play a little bit. Someone like that where they don't necessarily have to get 15, 20 minutes a game. They're just a guy that can be in a locker room voice.
I think it's very possible. I think if you're looking at what the Nuggets can add in the offseason, that definitely makes sense. They have a lot of their pieces locked up. They've got Bol locked up for if you're not going to move him. If you've got most of your rotation is locked up, other than Jeremy Grant, you want to bring him back for sure. When you look outside of that, you've got their first round pick. You can add that too, but a veteran voice is another thing that they didn't really have this year, other than Paul Millsap. So if they do add Paul Millsap back, if they bring him back, but maybe he's in a bench role, maybe he's in a lesser role going forward, then maybe he transitions into that. If you're looking at a veteran leader, a veteran voice who can he could stabilize the locker room, keep them motivated, and push it in the right direction. That I definitely see, and he's a guy that they respect for sure. Well, we're just going to have to see on that regard. I'm not sure who's available that fits that mold, but I think it's a mold that the Nuggets could definitely use. They have a lot of young guys already. PJ Dozier's locked up, and he'll probably contribute to the rotation next year. But we're going to see. I think that it's a good thing to think about.
Yeah, we've given you a few ideas, but what would you do looking at this team if you were Connolly? What would be the moves that you make for next season?
Well, first and foremost, you re-sign Jeremy Grant. I think that going into next season, you want at least those four positions locked up with Murray, Porter, Grant, and Jokic. And I think you start the season with those four, and that's your core going forward, and you just really hone in on that as much as possible. The fifth option, the shooting guard in that space, it's either Gary Harris or Will Barton, or you go outside of the organization and say, hey, we're going to look for another option there. I think that's the second priority if you're the Nuggets, is you have to figure out that shooting guard position at all costs. Probably has to be a secondary playmaker, probably has to be a high quality defender. There aren't very many players who fit that mold. It's a very rare thing to find in the NBA that if you're not, like, you don't usually do both. You're not usually a 3-and-D playmaker as a guard. That's why I pointed to Lonzo Ball in that situation as somebody who may not be perfect for that role, but he could grow into it for sure. Drew Holiday is another guy that they've kicked the doors on for a long time. A Fred VanVleet type would make sense. I'm not sure he's in their price range. He's probably outside of it by a lot. But there are pieces that you can get there. And then outside of that, if you've got your starting five locked up, you've got Monte Morris and PJ Dozier in the backcourt. If you bring Will Barton off the bench, he could be a sixth man type. They have to sign a backup center. They have to figure that out. But other than that, they're pretty much set. So you find a backup center role, you solidify your shooting guard position, whatever you're starting to, and you go from there.
Ryan, it's funny you mentioned that. Before we let you go, this is the last one for me. I saw on Twitter, and I don't know how true this is, so take it for a grain of salt, but there is some rumors being kicked around that Indiana might be looking to trade Victor Oladipo this summer. That's an interesting name. Guy who's a two guard. Defensively, I think he's solid. Now he's not necessarily a shooter, but I think he has the ability to knock down, shots from outside. But mainly the slasher type of guard. What do you think about that as a potential for the Nuggets? Now, I don't know what you'd have to give up to get a Victor Oladipo. It might be pricey. I don't know if you get out of that still keeping MPJ or Bol. You might have to give up a Gary Harris, a first-round pick. I don't know what, but if you could get out of that, if there's a scenario in which you could bring in a Victor Oladipo and somehow keep Jamal, obviously Jokic isn't going anywhere, and MPJ, what do you think of that as an option for the Nuggets?
It's a good name to throw out there for sure. I hope that it doesn't get too pricey at that point.
Yeah, I think
I would also
have to be signed too as well.
Yeah, he would be an expiring contract at that point because he's a free agent in 2021. So he's going to do what he can to earn as much money as he can. And I think if you're the Nuggets, you're not necessarily looking for a high volume scorer at that point. You're looking for somebody who can fill more of a role next to Murray, who's turned into an all-star caliber player. He's turned into an all-star caliber point scorer. And then you have Jokic, who's also going to put up 20 per game, regardless. You've got Porter, who you really trust in that situation to put up high-volume numbers going forward. I'm not sure how much of a high-volume scorer you're going to need in this case, and I'm not sure what Victor Oladipo provides when he is as a fourth option. Now, maybe if you just add a whole bunch of talent and say, hey, you guys are all really good, let's just figure it out, then maybe you can make it work. I think he has to commit to the defensive end continuing, and I don't know if how he gets paid going forward is committing to the defensive end. I think he's going to want to score. I think he's going to want to put up big numbers. And I'm not sure if that's the way that they will go, if that's the way that they should go. It's a good name to think about, though, and if he's a good guy, if he's somebody who you can get for Gary Harris and Bol and a first-round pick, then you probably do it. But I don't know. Maybe that's even too much to pay at that point because we haven't seen a healthy Victor Oladipo in a long time. Mm-hmm. He's been managing his injuries for a significant amount of time, for most of his career, in all honesty. And I hope he can get back to the all-star caliber player that he was, because he was a guy I was really high on at one point, and he's a guy who makes sense next to Jokic for sure, makes sense next to Murray for sure, at his ceiling. I'm not sure he'll ever get back to it.
Yeah, last thing from me, we had on live stream, we had someone comment, Kemp, what qualities would you like to see in a 2 that would ultimately complement Murray and MPJ's games along with Jokic. That should take precedent, right? I mean, finding someone who can mesh with those guys. And for at least for me, the guy who you mentioned earlier was Lonzo Ball. I think I never really thought about Lonzo. I don't know if New Orleans is willing to give him up. I don't know when he's going to be a free agent, but I don't think he's going to be a free agent anytime soon. So I guess what is that? Have you heard that New Orleans is maybe possibly going to be willing to trade him, or is it more of they'd rather trade like Drew Holiday and you would have to settle for that?
If you're thinking about Drew Holiday, you're definitely not settling. That is a
right. Well, yeah.
high quality player for sure. If you're the Nuggets, you probably prefer Drew Holiday in all honesty, because he's a straight line driver, he's a playmaker, he's also one of the best defending guards in the NBA. And if you're the Nuggets, if you're looking for that skill set, you're looking for somebody who can take some pressure off of Jamal Murray at every turn, defends the opposing team's best guard so Murray doesn't have to. And you're looking for somebody who can also be a playmaker and space the floor a little bit. I think that Drew fits that mold. I think Alonzo fits that mold down the line. There are very few guys that really fit that as the kind of combo guard, solid playmaking guard types. That there just aren't that many of those guys out there. So if you can get one, it's really a hybrid between Will Barton and Gary Harris, because you want Gary Harris's you want his defensive ability, but you also want Will Barton's playmaking ability and his ability to shoot off the dribble. So I think that Oladipo's another guy that you could look at and say, hey, at his ceiling, he makes some sense there. I'm not sure if he can get back to it like we talked about, but I've liked Lonzo. I think he makes a lot of sense. I think there are other guys that could make a lot of sense. PJ Dozier, if he could shoot, makes a lot of sense in that regard as well. We're going to have to see, because that's a really, really hard step, and the Nuggets have to figure that out, because if they mess that part up, then it could be a big setback for them.
Well, hopefully we are not talking about this sooner than we hope. Hopefully the Nuggets go farther in the playoffs and we can push this off-season conversation as far off as possible. Regardless, though, it's always good to have the Nuggets in the playoffs getting this experience, whether they win or lose. Hopefully it's a win. But Ryan Blackburn, dude, thanks so much for joining us. We love having you on of Denver Stiffs. Go check him out on Twitter at NBA Blackburn, site manager for the Denver Stiffs, at Denver Stiffs if you'd like to follow them as well. Before we let you go, though, is there anything you're working on or you guys are working on that you want people to know about?
Just make sure to check out denverstiffs.com. I just had a podcast on the Denver Stiffs podcast network with one of my writers, Quentin Alberti. He talked about being a black man in America right now. I think that's a very important topic that we need to cover, and that is very important for the current climate that we're in. And he shared some interesting stories that I think people should educate themselves about. So continue to do the right thing, America. Love each other, listen to each other as much as possible, and just go from there. And we also have Nuggets covers. That's pretty cool too.
Awesome. There you go. Double threat there. I like it. Ryan Blackburn, thanks so much, man, for taking out the time. We'll have to do this again soon whenever the Nuggets get bounced and they're gone fishing.
we will never be talking then. So have a good one, guys. I appreciate you having me on.
All right, that'll do it for us today. This again has been the Behind the Glass Sports Podcast. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening later on in the pod, we thank you guys so much. We will catch you guys on the next episode. Sweet. Awesome, man.